actually hungry most of the time these days. Because 4 months ago, I weighed 190 pounds. Today, I weigh 170 pounds.
You're serious?
Yeah. My weight loss strategy, don't eat. Works all the time. So, the downside of my weight loss strategy is it makes me a little grumpy all the time, you know, so just beware. All right, we are attempting to wrap up Kant today. I don't know if we'll succeed. So, let's see. Trevor. He's not here. He's probably home preparing his presentation for tomorrow. And I was going to tell him at the end of the period, I will tell him for sure whether it's tomorrow or Thursday. But this is fairly important stuff, and I don't want to rush through it. This is critical, really. In fact, I think of all of the people we cover in philosophy, Kant, in terms of my sense of the importance of them, would be in the top maybe 3. This guy is extraordinarily important. We were working through yesterday the 3 items that he says are upstairs in the attic. And the problem is we can't get there from here. But he says we must take them by what he calls faith. And I want to be real clear that what Kant calls faith is not necessarily what a Christian calls faith, but it is at least the same word. This is part of his pietism. He considers himself a good Christian, and he was throughout his life really what you'd call a pietistic Christian. But he does say that all of these, God, your belief in your own selfhood and in the external world, the essences of things in the objective world, are all undemonstrable, unprovable. They can only be taken transcendentally as reality, not because we can show them, but because we, in a sense, have to assume them. That's what he means by faith. If we lose any objective access to God, theology is the traditional study of God. Theology devolves into religion. And so now the word religion has taken over where the word theology used to be, you know. Same deal with the self. Self implies freedom. If you have a sense of self, packaged in that is a sense that you can decide what you're going to do. You have some, at least, notion that you're making choices and that no one is compelling you to those choices. You are free. So we have this notion of freedom, and freedom has been lost to psychology. I say that somewhat guardedly, speaking as a psych major, you know, so on. I'm taking a rather broad-based attack on my own discipline. Not that I love psychology all that much. It's the only major I hadn't tried by the time I had to declare, so it was more or less by default that I wound up a psych major. But one of the things you really recognize about psychology, some of you may turn out to be psych majors, and if so, God bless you. God help you. But in any event, if you do, one of the things you'll find out is that psychology is about the business of explaining you. And to explain something, you have to explain what you see. Explanation implies causation, you see. if I'm going to explain Kayla, then the whole task of doing that is trying to provide a rationale for what she does or what she feels. And all of that militates against a notion of freedom. It reduces her in some sense or other to a machine or a specimen of evaluation. Freud did that, and virtually the entire psychological industry since has been trying to explain in terms of causes the problems you have, the habits you can't break, whatever it might be. So psychology really is an attack on the notion of freedom, which is an attack on any sense of an independent self in there. I hope that's fairly clear, because it has certainly been important in subsequent history. Now, the last one that we didn't get to yesterday is the whole notion of essence, and here, actually I should call this law of nature, or laws of nature. If there is please get this, please. If there is an external universe, if there is such a thing, then there must be laws by which it operates. If the external universe is non-demonstrable, then those laws cease to be meaningful. The whole history of the West was about the task of understanding the universe in terms of laws, going clear back to Plato or Aristotle, the whole tradition. Certainly someone like John Locke, who argues as a cheerleader for natural law, all of that has been just assumed. And why not? It seems like the universe operates based on certain principles that I can sort of extrapolate by observation. If I'm not so sure about the external universe, then I'm not so sure about any idea of laws of nature. Not only, certainly, laws of nature as in gravity, but laws of nature as in morality. That's really, the more important playing field in this conversation. You guys are too young to remember this, but I remember it very well. A guy by the name of Clarence Thomas was prominently in the news a few years ago. Who is Clarence Thomas? He's still with us. Who is he? Excuse me, they're getting a copy, otherwise I will faint. So Clarence Thomas is, Krista?
A Supreme Court Justice?
He is a Supreme Court Justice, that's correct. He was nominated by Ronald Wilson Reagan. And he is distinctive on the Supreme Court because why? What is it that sort of makes him distinctive on the Supreme Court? Do you know? Anybody know? Krista?
Is he black?
He's black. He's African American. Okay. Brilliant guy, wonderful guy. And so it was somewhat, it caught the public attention when he was nominated because he's a, black American, and so there's all of that sense that we need to have that sort of diversity and so on. So it was fine. But it soon became obvious that not only was he black, which was fine, but he was conservative, which was not so fine. And so the press began to get nervous about Clarence Thomas, not because of his blackness, but because of his conservativeness. That's what got them. And so a reporter asked Clarence Thomas once, shortly after he had been nominated and before he had appeared before the Senate for confirmation, Mr. Thomas, or actually Judge Thomas, he was a circuit court judge at the time, do you believe in natural law? That was the question. What a baited question. Do you believe in natural law? And he answered without even a moment's hesitation, of course, and went on to the next question. Not realizing that that little response to that little question would produce a firestorm across the liberal media and the liberal Congress, because Teddy Kennedy almost by the next day, I think probably within, a few hours of that comment, said, "This man is going to destroy a woman's right to choose." It was like that, just leaping from there to there. It was this, and all of it was because Clarence Thomas said, "I believe in natural law." Because you see, if you say in the straight face, as a 20th century or 21st century lawyer, that you believe in natural law, then you have just basically taken a big sign, stuck it to yourself, and it says, "I am an idiot." That's the way it's viewed if you believe in natural law. If you go to law school someday, some of you might, and you just offhandedly remark that you have some sense that there's a law of nature, there's a fundamental law of morality out there by which we live, any professor in that law school that hears you say that is going to make a little note to self: this guy is stupid. This is a Neanderthal, and you will be subjected to ridicule and dismissive remarks of disdain because you embrace an idea that is pre-Kantian. Kant taught us there is no such thing as natural law, and that is the rule of the land today, in law school certainly, and generally in academic pursuits. And so when Clarence Thomas made that remark, of course, the press was all over it. The liberal Congress was all over it. It was as if he'd said, "I believe that children should be boiled in oil if they disobey their teachers." It was like he'd said this most ghastly, horrible thing. It's like you can't imagine the just eruption of outrage until a more frontal attack was taken against Clarence Thomas that caused the whole natural law thing to fade into obscurity. Anybody know what happened? Yeah, go ahead.
A woman he had worked with at a prior thing accused him of some kind of sexual.
That's right. A woman by the name of Anita Hill came along, and she accused Clarence Thomas of sexual improprieties. And of course that captured the public imagination, and the whole thing became this circus. And it was on, all of the Senate confirmation hearings were on day in and day out on the TV, and everybody was watching, and for like 2 weeks you've got this whole thing about, what Clarence Thomas may have said or not said, and the natural law problem went away. My own personal cynical feeling was that Anita Hill was sent in there like a torpedo to try to take this guy out. They were trying to figure out some way for him not to be confirmed. The problem was, as a black man, they had a very embarrassing problem not confirming him because of the embarrassment that would come by, not confirming a black man. But sexual issues trump race issues. And so they thought if they could get someone in there to attach a stigma to him on a sexual issue, that might actually beat the problem they had on the race issue. Politics is ugly in America, and that's really what was going on. But he was confirmed. Nevertheless, he's carried that little stigma to this day. To this day, people that remember that tend to remember, oh, he's the guy that was accused of sexual improprieties, even though there was really no meaningful evidence whatsoever, aside from her singular testimony, that any such thing happened. Go.
It seems to me that by making this accusation, they're appealing to natural law.
Yeah.
Has anyone pointed that out?
I'm sorry, I missed the force of your question.
First they get mad at him because he says
Right.
he uses natural law.
Yeah.
And then they make an accusation that it only hold water.
Based on natural. Yeah, that's right. It shows that's very, very good, very astute, Ben. Excellent. Yeah. But in politics, nobody worries about that stuff. It's just about winning, and any way you can figure out to do it will fly. But that's a very good catch right there. Yeah.
Is Clarence Thomas a good?
He's a good judge.
Okay.
Oh yeah, he's a great judge. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, we didn't watch the video on him last year in civics, did we? I've got a 60-minute video clip of him And they just interview him, and he's a wonderful guy. He's a great guy. He's a good judge, too, very bright. But that's just one of the little things that happen. Well, anyway, if there are no laws of nature, in other words, if morality is not determined by an objective order in the universe, then let me ask you, sports fans, what does determine morality? If it's not determined in an objective structure of the moral universe, then it must be determined by what? How do we determine morality? Sydney?
Would it be just the laws of the land?
Sort of. We determine it by, Krista, you were going to say?
I was going to say utilitarian ethics. But
Okay, that's a good answer. We really have to determine it based on, and I'm going to give you a word we haven't used before, but I want you to start kind of getting familiar with it, with positivism. Which in this case simply means, Trevor, it's nice to see you. It's great to have you here. Yeah. I hadn't noticed you came in until you started dropping stuff all over the floor. I was mentioning you a moment ago because I am not prepared to tell you quite yet whether you're reporting tomorrow. It's either, I'm going to tell you at the end of this period. All right? So it basically comes down to morality is determined by popular sentiment. Okay? Popular belief, popular opinion, which of course can easily be manipulated by the sophisticated demagogues of our society, you understand. But morality is not something determined by a sort of objective order of the universe, but it's determined by, and the way the Supreme Court now expresses it, it's determined by the values of the contemporary community. That's the magic language. The values of the contemporary community. So if the values of the contemporary community change, morality changes. 50 years ago, if you talked about abortion in polite society, you would just committed a social offense, because it was universally regarded as a deplorable kind of thing to do, to abort an unborn child. Today, that's where sophisticated opinion is. And if you think there's something wrong with it, then you're the one who's got a problem. Why did that happen? Because we have believed as a society since Kant that whatever sort of popular opinion is what the moral order really ought to be. Do you follow that? That's kind of the effect. So Kant has done some huge things to us. I don't think he intended it. I don't think he himself foresaw the long-term effects of his Copernican revolution, but that certainly has been the effect since him. Okay, I hope you're all kind of grabbing this. This what I'm telling you, all modesty aside, is pure gold. This is helpful stuff. And to the degree you really understand it, it'll help you understand your culture. It'll certainly help you understand the education you're about to get, depending on where you go to college. It gives you a framework with which to kind of understand some of the things that are going to be said to you in a variety of college classrooms. All right, this is our fifth point. All right, this is the upstairs, the attic, you can call it the two-storied house, so on. It goes with the meat grinder and all the other stuff. And it brings us to our sixth of our 6 easy points. And that is the whole thing called practical reason. I don't have a nifty little image here like a sausage grinder for this one. I don't know how else to put it except just call it practical reason. Kant wrote a book after the book entitled Critique of Pure Reason, which was entitled Critique of Practical Reason. And this is sort of telling the rest of the story from his point of view, based on the effects of his first book. All right. Kant would say there's no certainty about the noumenal world, No certainty about what's upstairs in the attic, but he says, we nevertheless must live as if the attic were there. We must live as if those noumenal realities are there as a practical matter. We can't know for sure. But I must live as if, and that's the critical language. I am living as if those things are true. It's a practical necessity. It must be assumed, but cannot be proven. The reason we must assume it is because if that other side, that noumenal level is not there, there is no freedom, there is no morality, there is no purpose, there is no meaning, there is no value. Your life reduces to complete, irretrievable nonsense. Now, I just want you to grab the point here. Kant says we have to live as if those things are true. Otherwise, life becomes meaningless. Right? And I told you earlier that really since Kant, you're just dealing with various strands of thought that come out of him. Right? A little starburst. Remember that? And one of the strands that comes out of Kant is a strand that says, all right, if there's no noumenal, life is meaningless. Therefore, Kant says, I have to live as if there were a noumenal, but hey, maybe there isn't a noumenal. Maybe life is meaningless. And what strand of philosophy coming out of Kant basically says, yeah, life is meaningless. You know, and it is what?
Is that nihilism?
Well, nihilism or nihilism is certainly one of them. Nihilism comes under a little bit of a larger term. That's certainly a good answer. Generally, you would call it some form of. Nihilism is kind of one form of what's sometimes called existentialism, which simply is the idea that all there is existence. We just are out there existing. You know. And to some degree, you're living in a culture which has not only bought Kant's statement that we can't know for sure that there's anything at the noumenal level, but also bought the strand from Kant that says, therefore, life probably is meaningless. Or, to put another way, life only has the meaning that you create in it. There's a song that I'm going to play for you one of these days. You may have heard it. I assume you all have. It was a kind of pop culture song some years back, and it was simply entitled Dust in the Wind. You know that? It's kind of a nice tune. The line that's repeated again and again in this song, over and over, educating the culture when I was your age. This is when it was popular. You know, all we are is dust in the wind. Mm-hmm. You know, it's just a lovely tune educating you that your life is no more meaningful than a little speck of dust blowing in the wind, lost. Comes into focus, goes out of focus, it's gone. That's your life. your desires, your passions, your meaning, all of those things, just dust in the wind, swirling along, coming from nowhere, going nowhere, having no purpose. That's you. And you can thank Kant for that conviction. Because Kant said if we cannot demonstrate what's on the other side of the wall, life is meaningless. And others said, and we cannot demonstrate it, therefore life is meaningless. Okay. Well, Kant, of course, doesn't want to take us there. Kant thinks it's the worst of all possible outcomes to actually believe that your life has no meaning. He thinks that's a horrific prospect. And so he is saying to us, even though we cannot know for sure, we have to assume these noumenal realities to give meaning to the life that we are now living. And so he says, as a practical matter, we must assume them. This is a critique of practical reason, or what you might call practical necessity in your reasoning. And that's the real point of it, is this notion that we have to bring these things in more or less at the level of presupposition. This is part of his transcendental approach to understanding it. And probably the best way to illustrate it is in terms of what is sometimes called his moral argument for the existence of God. Kant gives us an argument for God's existence. It's called the moral argument. So I'm going to give this to you kind of in little bite sizes, get it down, try to digest it, understand it. The moral argument for God's existence. He notes, point one, we have a sense of duty. It is common to all people. We have a sense of duty. It is common to all people. I have a sense of oughtness in my life. I have a sense that there are things I ought to do and things I ought not do. And that is constantly present in me. And without it, life itself, as I think of it, would be impossible. I've used my absurd illustrations of this before. I won't remind you of them, but if there's no sense of duty, if there's no sense of oughtness in life, then it really doesn't matter whether I help somebody or mow them down in my car. There's no difference, you know. Stepping on you is no difference ultimately than stepping on an ant or squirting Raid at a fly in my house. Or there's no difference. You see, if there's no ought, there's no difference. Your life has no value. You're just a lump of chemical reaction which is going to fizz out pretty soon. So what does it matter? So Kant says that obviously is nothing. We cannot live that way. We cannot operate in a universe in which there is no sense of duty. What would the world look like if we got rid of that sense of morality? And then he asks the question, it's a transcendental argument. It's the original form of the transcendental argument. So what must be necessary for our sense of duty to have any legitimacy? And he says, well, for our sense of duty to be meaningful, there must be justice. In other words, my sense of ought is somehow connected to a notion that somehow or other in the universe, my moral behavior is being kept track of. It makes a difference how I behave. If I steal, something or other notices that. Somehow or other, there's justice that's watching me. Otherwise, what's the point of this sense of duty? It's connected to some idea of a great evaluation of my life. But he says, okay, how much justice do I see in this world? I look around this world, and I notice that while there's an axiom we've all heard, that crime doesn't pay. As a matter of fact, Laura, is it the case that crime sometimes does pay? Is that the case? Just based on what you see in this world?
You be short
No, sometimes not so short term. Let me ask you this. Of all of the unethical acts that take place in this world, how many of them do you think in this world are actually caught and punished? What percentage of immoral acts, criminal acts, violations of law, what percentage are actually caught and punished, do you think?
So, violations of law.
Yeah.
acts.
All of these. Any unethical act. Speeding. Speeding is a violation of the law. Law says 35 miles an hour, you do 40, you're breaking the law. How many violations of law, unethical acts, immoral acts do you think, on a percentage basis, are actually punished in this world? What percentage? Jordan?
I wouldn't say any more than 2%.
Okay, I think that would be a gross exaggeration. I think it's vanishingly small how many are actually caught and punished. Well less, in my opinion, a fraction of 1% and a tiny fraction of 1%. Constantly. And so then you have to ask the question, well then, why should I be obeying these laws at all? It seems to me, listen to me, that sometimes people do get away with it. People do get away with their criminal behavior. They sail off to Rio de Janeiro and live happily ever after as the result of their criminal activities. Ever so often somebody gets caught, but for the most part people do get away with it. I'm going to tell you, as a matter of fact, as a practical matter, crime pays every day. Every day. People are bettering their situation based on criminal activity. It's happening right now as we speak in Spokane, Washington. It is happening. People are improving their situations by criminal activity. I've talked you into it. Great. All right. Kant says, so why should any of us be messing around with observing ethical rules, given the fact that in the vast majority of cases, crime pays? The reason people get caught is stupidity, not that the criminal behavior is self-judging, that it always is going to catch you in the end. It doesn't happen that way. Some crooks die in the midst of their great wealth, and at least what you see is they got away with it big time. So Kant says, given the fact that we don't see anything like perfect justice in this world, in order for my sense of ethics to be meaningful, and given the fact that there's very little justice in this world, in order for my ethics to be meaningful, what must be true? Jacob, if there's not much justice in this world to vindicate my ethics, if I'm going to hang on to my ethics, which I need to have a meaningful life, then what must be the case about justice? If there's not much justice in this world, then what?
Not really sure.
What would Kant say must be that if there's not much justice in this world, then what?
If there's not justice in this world, then there must be justice in a different world.
That's right. Kant says, since there's not perfect justice here, there must be perfect justice after, in some sense or other, this world. Okay? There's got to be life beyond this world. Is he proving there's life beyond this world? Answer, class? Is he proving it? No. He doesn't know. But he's saying, kind of like Pascal's wager, we have to assume it. Otherwise, meaning in this world is utterly lost to us. But it takes more than life after death. It's not just that. That's got to be part of it, he says. But in order for there to be perfect justice and a life after death, what are we going to have to run into? We wake up on the other side of the grave, find out, wow, there really was life after death. But what else must be true? Nicole?
There has to be a judge.
Got to be a judge. And what are some of the characteristics of that judge? Could it be a judge that you could pay off with an appropriate bribe? Tell me about this judge. What must be true of this judge?
The judge must be perfectly just.
He's got to be perfectly just. Let's say you wake up in life after death land and encounter a perfectly just judge, does that mean for sure there's going to be perfect justice? What else must be true of that judge besides he's perfectly just? Ben?
Well, he has to, first of all, know everything.
He's got to know everything.
And he's got to have complete power.
Power to execute justice. You see that? In other words, in order for justice to be perfectly executed, you've got to have a judge who not only is perfectly just in himself, but he has the power to execute perfect justice, and he has knowledge of every detail necessary for that execution of justice to be just. If he's fooled, if he's tricked, if he's, only partially informed, then again there's a possibility of something less than justice happening. In other words, what Kant begins to paint for us is a picture that looks an awful lot like the Christian God. An omniscient, omnipotent God who's holy, who's righteous in his deeds. And if we run into that God in life after death, then all of a sudden it makes the way I live here a little bit more important. You see, my the way I drive, the way I don't cheat on exams, the way I pay my taxes, the way I do all the things that I'm required to do, I do partly because I believe, someday I'm going to be facing that judge who's going to be looking in exacting detail at my life. And Kant says we need to live as if that God is out there, as a practical matter, even though none of us can know for sure whether he's really there. Okay? That's his moral argument. It's an argument from practical necessity. It doesn't prove there's a God. We don't know. But we need to live as if there's a God. So.
In the beginning, towards the beginning of his argument, you said that there must be somebody taking note of my actions in order for it to be meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that seems to kind of go against this idea of positivism, in the sense that it's not really justice that goes.
Oh, that's
with
right.
justice.
Oh, please understand that Kant doesn't want this. This is not Kant. Kant is trying to avoid this. He sees that as horrible. But he's saying the other way to avoid it is as a practical necessity. You're right. He thinks this is terrible to strip us of freedom, to strip us of any sense truly of God. He says that is bad news. But later thinkers have nevertheless followed Kant. They've abandoned his practical argument, but they've hung on to his fundamental argument that we cannot know. That's really, it's a good question, and that's what he's trying to avoid, is that very eventuality. In some ways, in the history of Christian apologetics, Kant won. You don't hear out there in the world of Christian apologetics much anymore evidential arguments. You don't hear them. They are in kind of the backwoods. And generally speaking, evidential arguments are generally viewed with disdain by philosophers who say, oh, they don't work. Haven't you read Kant? And even in the world of Christian apologetics, in spite of people like Josh McDowell, who keeps writing books, More Evidence That Demands a Verdict, More Evidence That Demands a Verdict. No, but not, generally people are not moved by it. We have a Kantian culture which really doesn't think evidence is going to get you from here to God, from the phenomenal to the noumenal. But what has happened in Christian apologetics is we have embraced profoundly this sort of transcendental argument. That's one of the most popular arguments these days for Christian truth. It's a transcendental argument. The way it works is not simply saying that, we have to assume it for life to be meaningful, but showing that everybody does assume it. And that's how the transcendental argument operates. And to be honest with you, it's pretty effective. If it's used well, it can be quite effective. I'm not so sure that we should be lying down and playing dead at the feet of Kant. As Christian people, I think maybe we need to go back and revisit whether what he says is quite so convincing in terms of his great wall. But at least at this point, that's certainly the way it's taken. Okay. further comments about that? Do you kind of follow what's going on here? Everything that we say from this point on is always going to refer back to Kant. In some sense or other, we're always going to be having to interpret everything else in light of him. The one thing we haven't talked about, which I will treat briefly tomorrow, is the categorical imperative. So, I think it's safe to say tomorrow you're going to go. All right? So.